The concrete floor of the training hall was about to be painted with blood, but Lieutenant Sarah Chen didn't know that yet. She stood at the edge of the sparring circle, watching 18 Marine Corps infantry soldiers form a loose semicircle around the mats, their faces wearing the same expression she'd seen 1,000 times before, the look of predators who'd just spotted wounded prey. Staff Sergeant Marcus Kane stepped forward, his combat boots echoing against the polished floor with deliberate menace. At 6'4" and 240 pounds of muscle, hardened by 3 tours in Afghanistan, he commanded attention simply by existing. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience when he addressed the woman in the center of the circle. "Well, well, look what the Navy sent us." His lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. "A little girl playing dress-up in fatigues. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today?" Sarah adjusted the tape around her knuckles with methodical precision, each wrapped tight and even, her movements carrying the fluid efficiency of someone who'd performed this ritual countless times. She wore standard-issue PT gear, gray t-shirt, black shorts, regulation, running shoes. Nothing to distinguish her from any other service member, except for the almost supernatural stillness that seemed to radiate from her compact frame. The 18 Marines around the circle began to close ranks. Sensing entertainment, Corporal Jake Morrison pulled out his phone and angled it toward the mats. "This is gonna be good," he muttered to the man beside him, finger hovering over the record button. Kane's grin widened as he noticed the phone. "Perfect. We'll want proof of what happens to little girls who think they can train warriors." Sarah finished taping her hands and looked up, meeting Kane's gaze with eyes that held depths he couldn't fathom. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, controlled, carrying an undertone that made something cold settle in the pit of his stomach. "The technique today is defensive combat against multiple opponents." She gestured to the circle of Marines. "I'll need volunteers." Kane's laughter boomed across the hall. "Volunteers? Sweetheart, you're looking at the entire advanced combat training class. These men eat seals for breakfast." He rolled his massive shoulders, producing audible cracks. "But don't worry. We'll go easy on you." He turned to address his men, voice rising to carry across the space. "Here's the deal, Marines. Our little instructor here thinks she can teach us something about combat. So, let's give her a practical demonstration of what real fighting looks like." Kane's eyes glittered with malicious intent as he continued. "Standard rules don't apply today. This isn't a training exercise, it's an education. And sometimes," his gaze shifted back to Sarah, cold and predatory, "sometimes education requires breaking a few things to make the lesson stick." The Marines around the circle stirred restlessly, sensing the shift from routine training to something darker. A few exchanged uncertain glances, but none spoke up. Kane's authority was absolute here, and questioning him meant consequences none of them wanted to face. Morrison hit record on his phone, the small red light beginning to blink. "This is about to go viral," he whispered to his neighbor. "Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today?" Sarah stood in the center of the circle, 18 armed and hostile Marines surrounding her, listening to their instructor essentially order them to commit assault. Any rational person would have backed down, requested backup, or at minimum protested the blatantly illegal nature of what Kane was proposing. Instead, Sarah Chen simply nodded once and settled into a stance that looked deceptively casual. Weight centered, hands loose at her sides, breathing steady and controlled. To the untrained eye, she appeared relaxed, almost bored, but there was something in the way she positioned herself, something about the mathematical precision of her movements, that suggested she was calculating angles and distances with the cold efficiency of a targeting computer. Kane didn't notice. He was too busy savoring what he assumed would be his complete domination of the woman who'd had the audacity to think she could instruct his Marines. He raised his hand, preparing to give the signal that would unleash 18 trained killers on a single target. "Remember, boys," he called out, his voice thick with anticipation. "Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And sometimes," his hand dropped, "you have to break a few legs to teach a lesson." The circle exploded into motion. 18 Marines rushed toward the center, converging on Sarah with the coordinated brutality of a wolf pack. Morrison's phone captured it all, the moment when superior numbers and brute force should have overwhelmed one small woman in a matter of seconds. What happened next would shatter every assumption those Marines held about combat, about strength, and about the woman they'd just tried to destroy. Sarah Chen had been waiting for this moment her entire life, and she was about to show them exactly who they'd chosen to hunt. The first Marine to reach Sarah was Private Rodriguez, a heavyweight boxer who'd earned his reputation by putting 3 men in the hospital during bar fights. He came in low and fast, aiming to tackle her at the waist and drive her into the concrete. His 220-pound frame should have been unstoppable. He never even touched her. Sarah sidestepped with fluid precision, her hand shooting out to catch Rodriguez's extended arm. She used his own momentum against him, redirecting his charge with a movement so economical it appeared effortless. Rodriguez flew past her and crashed into 2 Marines coming from the opposite direction, sending all 3 sprawling in a tangle of limbs. The circle tightened. Lance Corporal Peters rushed from her left while Corporal Jackson attacked from the right, trying to pin her between them. Sarah dropped into a crouch, sweeping Peters' legs as she pivoted to deliver a precise elbow strike to Jackson's solar plexus. Peters hit the ground hard, gasping for air. Jackson doubled over, the wind driven from his lungs. "What the hell?" Morrison's voice cracked as he struggled to keep his phone steady. The footage showed something that shouldn't be possible. One woman systematically dismantling multiple attackers with movements that looked more like choreographed combat than desperate self-defense. Kane's confident grin had vanished. His jaw tightened as he watched his Marines, men he'd personally trained, men who'd proven themselves in actual combat, being handled like recruits on their first day of boot camp. "Stop playing with her," he roared. "Take her down." The remaining Marines surged forward in a coordinated assault. Sarah's response was immediate and devastating. She moved through them like water flowing around stones, never where they expected, always a half-second ahead of their strikes. A knee to one attacker's ribs, an elbow to another's jaw, a precise strike to a pressure point that dropped a 3rd Marine instantly. Bodies began accumulating on the mat around her. Some groaned and tried to rise. Others lay still, either unconscious or too stunned to move. Throughout it all, Sarah's breathing remained steady and controlled. 4 counts in. Hold. 4 counts out, the rhythm of someone maintaining perfect composure under extreme duress. Staff Sergeant Kane watched in growing horror as his carefully orchestrated lesson transformed into something else entirely. This wasn't supposed to happen. 18 Marines against 1 woman should have been over in seconds, not turning into a demonstration of his men's inadequacy. "Enough." Kane's voice boomed across the hall. "I said enough." But the momentum had taken on a life of its own. The Marines who were still standing came at Sarah with increasing desperation, their coordinated tactics dissolving into wild, undisciplined attacks. Each assault ended the same way, with another body hitting the mat and Sarah standing untouched in the center of an expanding circle of groaning, defeated men. Corporal Morrison kept filming, his hands shaking as he captured footage that would haunt him for years. On the small screen of his phone, he watched Sarah catch a charging Marine's arm, twist it with surgical precision, and send the 200-pound man flying over her shoulder to crash into 2 of his squad mates. The impact echoed through the training hall like thunder. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered from the edge of the circle. "She's not even breathing hard." It was true. While 18 Marines lay scattered across the mats in various states of consciousness, Sarah Chen stood in the center of the carnage, looking as composed as when the exercise began. Her PT gear showed no signs of the violence that had just erupted around her. No sweat, no heavy breathing, no indication that she'd just single-handedly dismantled an entire squad of trained infantry. She turned slowly, her gaze sweeping across the aftermath. When her eyes found Kane, he felt something cold and primal crawl up his spine. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction at her victory. Just the calm, analytical assessment of a predator evaluating whether the threat had been neutralized. Kane's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, then stopped. Even he wasn't stupid enough to draw a weapon during what was officially a training exercise. But every instinct he possessed was screaming danger signals, telling him that the woman standing before him represented a threat unlike anything he'd encountered in 3 tours of combat. "What are you?" he whispered, the question escaping before he could stop it. Sarah tilted her head slightly, considering his words. When she spoke, her voice carried the same quiet control it had maintained throughout the entire encounter. "I'm exactly what you made me be, Staff Sergeant. You ordered your men to break my legs." She gestured to the Marines scattered around her feet. "I simply chose not to let them." The training hall fell into absolute silence except for the groans of injured Marines and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Morrison's phone continued recording, capturing the aftermath of what could only be described as impossible. 18 elite infantry soldiers, defeated by a single woman who appeared to have barely exerted herself. Kane stared at the scene, his mind struggling to process what he'd witnessed. These weren't recruits or weekend warriors scattered across his training mats. These were battle-tested Marines, men who'd survived firefights in Helmand Province, soldiers he'd personally trained in hand-to-hand combat. And they'd been dismantled by someone who looked like she could teach elementary school art classes. "Corpsman." Kane finally found his voice. "We need a corpsman in here." Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class Jennifer Walsh burst through the training hall doors, medical kit in hand. She took one look at the scene and froze. Bodies everywhere, Marines clutching various limbs and extremities, all radiating outward from a single point where Sarah Chen stood with the same neutral expression she'd worn at the start. "My God," Walsh breathed. "What happened here?" "Training accident," Kane said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. Even he didn't believe the lie he was telling. Walsh moved quickly between the fallen Marines, assessing injuries. Most were superficial bruises, minor sprains, wounded pride. But 3 were unconscious, and Rodriguez was clutching his shoulder in a way that suggested serious damage. "This one needs X-rays," Walsh called out, kneeling beside Rodriguez. "Possible dislocation." And this Marine she moved to examine Corporal Jackson has signs of a severe concussion. As Walsh worked, more personnel began filtering into the training hall. Word was spreading through the base, with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. Something extraordinary had happened, and everyone wanted to see the aftermath. Master Chief Petty Officer Raymond Torres entered with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. He was a 25-year Navy veteran with eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for cutting through military bureaucracy like a hot knife through butter. He surveyed the scene with the analytical precision of a career investigator. "Staff Sergeant Kane," Torres said, his voice carrying the authority of rank and experience. "Would you care to explain what happened in my training facility?" Kane straightened, but his usual confidence had evaporated. "Master Chief, we were conducting defensive combat training. The exercise got intense." "Intense." Torres repeated the word as if tasting something unpleasant. His gaze swept across the scattered Marines, then settled on Sarah, who stood quietly to one side, hands clasped behind her back in a modified parade rest. "And this was 18 men? Against 1 instructor?" "Yes, Master Chief." "I see." Torres walked closer to Sarah, studying her with the assessment of someone who'd seen enough combat to recognize a warrior when he encountered one. "What's your name, sailor?" "Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Master Chief. Temporary assignment for advanced combat instruction." Torres nodded slowly. There was something in her bearing, something about the way she held herself, that triggered recognition in his experienced mind. He'd seen that particular brand of stillness before, but only in very specific circumstances. "Lieutenant Chen, are you injured?" "No, Master Chief." "And these Marines attacked you simultaneously?" "Yes, Master Chief." On Staff Sergeant Kane's direct order. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Torres turned his attention to Kane, whose face had gone pale at Sarah's matter-of-fact statement. "Staff Sergeant, did you order your men to assault an officer?" Kane's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. The legal implications of what he'd done were becoming crystal clear, and none of them were good for his career or his freedom. Morrison stepped forward, phone still in his hand. "Master Chief, I recorded the whole thing." Torres extended his hand. "Let me see that footage, Marine." Morrison hesitated, glancing at Kane, then handed over his phone. Torres watched the video with increasing amazement. The recording showed the entire encounter from start to finish: Kane's order to break her legs, the coordinated assault, Sarah's systematic dismantling of 18 attackers without sustaining so much as a scratch. When the video ended, Torres looked up at Sarah with something approaching awe. "Lieutenant, where exactly did you receive your combat training?" "I'm afraid that information is classified, Master Chief." Torres stared at her for a long moment. In his quarter-century of military service, he'd encountered classified personnel before, but never someone with the capability he'd just witnessed on video. Never someone who could take down 18 trained fighters without breaking a sweat. "Kane," Torres said, his voice sharp as a blade, "you're relieved of duty pending investigation. These Marines need medical attention, and we need answers about what the hell just happened here." As Kane was led away by military police, Torres pulled Sarah aside. His voice dropped to a confidential tone. "Lieutenant, I'm going to need to make some calls about this incident. Highly unusual circumstances require highly unusual protocols." He paused. "Is there anything you need to tell me about who you really are?" Sarah met his gaze with those impossibly calm eyes. "Master Chief, with respect, you don't have the clearance to know who I really am." Torres felt a chill run down his spine. In 25 years of service, he'd never heard anyone speak to him with that particular combination of respect and absolute certainty. It was the voice of someone who operated at levels he'd never even imagined. As medical personnel continued treating the wounded Marines, as Kane disappeared under military police escort, as word of the impossible incident spread through the base like wildfire, one question echoed in everyone's mind. Who was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, and what kind of training could possibly produce someone capable of what they'd just witnessed? The answer to that question would shatter everything they thought they knew about warfare, about special operations, and about the quiet woman who just reminded 18 Marines that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one you never see coming. Master Chief Torres sat alone in his office at 0200 hours, the glow of his computer screen casting harsh shadows across his weathered face. The base had finally quieted after the chaos of the evening. 18 Marines hospitalized, a staff sergeant under arrest, and video footage that defied everything he thought he knew about human capability. He'd sent the initial incident report up the chain of command 3 hours ago. The response had been immediate and unsettling. Classify all materials. Restrict access. Await further orders. Now, Torres stared at his computer, cursor hovering over the secure military personnel database. Lieutenant Sarah Chen's service record should be straightforward: assignment history, training records, performance evaluations, standard administrative documentation that told the story of a military career. Instead, he found a file that raised more questions than it answered. Basic information appeared normal at first glance. Sarah Chen, Lieutenant, United States Navy. Age 29. Security clearance. Secret. Current assignment. Temporary combat instructor. Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. But when Torres tried to access her training records, he hit a wall. Access denied. Insufficient clearance level. He tried her deployment history. Same result. Medical records. Psychological evaluations. Even her basic fitness assessments, all sealed behind security protocols he'd never encountered in 25 years of service. Torres leaned back in his chair, a cold understanding settling in his stomach. He'd seen classified personnel before, but never someone whose entire service record was locked down this tight. This wasn't just classified, this was buried. His secure phone rang. The caller ID showed only a number he didn't recognize. "Master Chief Torres," he answered. "Master Chief, this is Colonel James Mitchell, Pentagon Personnel Security. I understand you've had an unusual incident involving Lieutenant Chen." Torres straightened in his chair. "Pentagon calls at 0200 were never good news." "Yes, sir. 18 Marines were injured during a training exercise. Lieutenant Chen was the instructor. I need you to listen very carefully, Master Chief. Lieutenant Chen is not who her service record indicates. Her actual identity and mission parameters are classified at levels that require special compartmented information clearance." "Sir, what exactly are you telling me?" A pause on the other end of the line. "I'm telling you that what happened in your training hall tonight was not an accident. Lieutenant Chen was specifically assigned to your base for reasons that go far beyond combat instruction." Torres felt his world tilting. "Assigned by whom? For what purpose?" "That information is need to know. And right now, you don't need to know. What you need to understand is that Lieutenant Chen is under the protection of the highest levels of military intelligence. Any investigation into tonight's incident will be handled through special channels." The line went dead. Torres stared at his phone for a long moment, then turned back to his computer. He pulled up Staff Sergeant Kane's personnel file, looking for anything that might explain why Sarah Chen had been sent to his base, why Kane had been targeted, why 18 Marines had been used as unwitting participants in what was beginning to look like a very complex operation. Kane's record showed the standard progression of a career Marine: combat deployments, commendations, advanced training certifications. But as Torres dug deeper, he found anomalies. 3 separate complaints of excessive force during training exercises, all filed by junior personnel, all mysteriously withdrawn before formal investigation. More disturbing were Kane's financial records. Torres didn't have access to bank statements, but he could see the security clearance investigations that mentioned unexplained cash deposits, luxury purchases inconsistent with military pay, and travel to locations not covered by official duty assignments. Kane wasn't just a brutal instructor. He was compromised. Torres picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Torres? Jesus, Ray, it's the middle of the night." The voice belonged to Commander Patricia Valdez, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. "Pat, I need a favor." "Off the books. What kind of favor gets me a call at 0200? "The kind that involves a staff sergeant who just ordered 18 Marines to assault a Navy lieutenant, and a lieutenant who put all 18 in the hospital without breaking a sweat." Silence on the other end. Then, "Ray, please tell me you're exaggerating. I have video footage. I'll be there in 2 hours." Commander Valdez arrived at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as the sun was rising over the Pacific. She was a compact woman with steel-gray hair and the no-nonsense bearing of someone who'd spent 15 years investigating military crimes that most people preferred to pretend didn't exist. Torres met her at the main gate, exhaustion etched across his features. "Pat, before we go any further, you need to understand that this case has already been flagged by Pentagon security. We're walking into something bigger than a training incident." "How much bigger?" "The lieutenant at the center of this doesn't officially exist. Her entire service record is classified beyond my clearance level. And someone from the Pentagon called me at 0200 to tell me the investigation was being handled through special channels." Valdez stopped walking. "Ray, in 15 years of NCIS work, I've never seen a case that was too classified for local investigation. What the hell happened in that training hall?" Torres led her to his office and played Morrison's video footage. Valdez watched in silence as Sarah Chen systematically dismantled 18 attackers with movements that looked more like martial arts demonstration than desperate self-defense. When the video ended, Valdez was quiet for a long moment. "That's not possible. No one has that kind of training." "Apparently someone does." Valdez replayed the footage, studying Sarah's movements with the analytical eye of someone trained to notice details others missed. "Look at her breathing pattern. She never breaks rhythm, even during the most intense moments. And watch her positioning. She's always exactly where she needs to be to control the engagement. Military training, beyond military training. This is something else entirely. Valdez paused the video on a frame, showing Sarah in mid-motion. Her body positioned with mathematical precision. Ray, this woman has been trained by people who exist in shadows. Special operations doesn't even begin to cover this. Torres pulled up Kane's personnel file on his computer. There's more. Kane has been taking unexplained payments for the past 2 years. Cash deposits that don't match his military salary. Travel records that don't align with official duty assignments. Valdez studied the financial anomalies. He's been compromised. Someone's been paying him for information or access. She looked up from the screen. Ray, what if Lieutenant Chen wasn't sent here to teach combat techniques? What if she was sent here to investigate Kane? Investigation disguised as a training assignment? It would explain why her records are so heavily classified. Military intelligence doesn't create cover identities unless they're running a very specific type of operation. Torres felt pieces clicking into place. So Kane orders his Marines to assault her, thinking he's humiliating some random instructor. Instead, he's attacking a federal agent running a classified investigation, and she uses the assault as an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that will force a full investigation into Kane's activities. Valdez nodded slowly. Clever. Brutal. But clever. A knock at Torres's office door interrupted their conversation. A young petty officer entered with a concerned expression. Master Chief, there's been a development. Staff Sergeant Kane was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent suicide. Torres and Valdez exchanged glances. In the span of 12 hours, their training incident had evolved into a classified operation involving unknown federal agents and was now a potential homicide investigation. Suicide? Valdez's voice carried the skepticism of someone who'd seen too many convenient deaths. What method? Hanging, ma'am. Used his uniform belt. But the petty officer hesitated. The guards say he was under constant observation. Nobody saw anything. After the petty officer left, Valdez turned to Torres with a grim expression. Ray, Kane didn't kill himself. Someone silenced him before he could talk. Which means Lieutenant Chen isn't the only player on this board. No. And if Kane's death was arranged this quickly, we're dealing with people who have access to military facilities and personnel. Valdez stood up, her investigator instincts fully engaged. I need to interview Lieutenant Chen immediately. Good luck with that. She disappeared after giving her initial statement. No forwarding address, no contact information. Valdez stared at him. A Navy lieutenant just vanished from a military base? Apparently, Navy lieutenants who don't officially exist can do that. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood in the observation deck of a nondescript office building overlooking the naval base, watching through high-powered binoculars as NCIS personnel processed Kane's death scene. She wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, and a plain black jacket, but her bearing remained unmistakably military. Behind her, a man in an expensive suit studied multiple computer screens displaying real-time intelligence feeds. Colonel Marcus Webb was officially assigned to Pentagon logistics. Unofficially, he ran the most classified counterintelligence operation in the Department of Defense. Kane's elimination was expected, Webb said without looking up from his screens. The network doesn't tolerate loose ends. How many more are there? Sarah asked, lowering her binoculars. At least 12 confirmed assets across 5 different bases. Kane was mid-level important enough to have access, expendable enough to be sacrificed when the operation was blown. Sarah turned from the window. The Marines who attacked me yesterday have no idea they were being used as cover for an assassination. The Marines served their purpose. Kane's death will be ruled suicide. The assault incident will be classified and buried. To the outside world, nothing unusual happened at Coronado yesterday. Except 18 Marines were traumatized, and I had to reveal capabilities that took 15 years to develop. Webb finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. Sarah, you've been hunting this network for 3 years. Kane's elimination proves we're getting close to something they're desperate to protect. Sarah walked to a wall covered with photographs, documents, and connecting lines that mapped a complex web of military personnel, defense contractors, and foreign intelligence operatives. At the center of the web was a single question mark, labeled Control. Kane was taking payments from someone with access to classified personnel records, Sarah said, studying the connections. Someone who knew my real identity and mission parameters. Someone who arranged for me to be assigned to his training program. Someone who wanted to see what would happen when an unstoppable force met an immovable object. Sarah touched one of the photographs, a surveillance shot of Kane meeting with an unidentified man in civilian clothes. No, someone who wanted to test my capabilities under combat conditions. Kane's attack wasn't random harassment. It was a field evaluation. Webb stood up from his computer terminal. Evaluation for what purpose? To determine if I was worth recruiting. Sarah's voice carried an edge of cold realization. The same way they recruited Kane. The same way they've compromised dozens of other personnel. They don't just buy information, they identify and cultivate assets with specific skill sets. You think they were trying to flip you? I think they were trying to demonstrate that my government couldn't protect me. 18 Marines attacking me simultaneously should have resulted in serious injury or death. When I survived, they sent a message through Kane's elimination. Webb felt something cold settle in his stomach. What message? Sarah turned from the wall of intelligence, her eyes holding the same impossible calm that had unnerved Master Chief Torres. That they can reach anyone, anywhere, anytime. That classification levels and security clearances are meaningless. That even someone with my training and capabilities is vulnerable to their network. Are you? Sarah considered the question for a moment. Ask me again after we find Control. Webb pulled up a new screen showing financial transactions linked to Kane's accounts. We've traced the payments to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The corporation received funding from at least 6 different sources, including 2 defense contractors with Pentagon connections. Any names? 1. The signature on the incorporation documents belongs to someone calling themselves Iron Wolf. Sarah went very still. Show me. Webb pulled up the document. At the bottom, a signature that looked like it belonged on a legal contract rather than a spy thriller. But Sarah recognized the handwriting immediately. I know that signature, she said quietly. From where? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the screen with an expression Webb had never seen before. Not calm. Not controlled. Something far more dangerous. From my training records 15 years ago, she said finally. Iron Wolf was the code name used by my first commanding officer in special operations. The person who recruited me, trained me, and sent me on every classified mission for the first 7 years of my career. Webb stared at her. You're saying your former commander is running a spy network? I'm saying my former commander is Control. And Kane's death wasn't about silencing a compromised asset. Sarah's voice carried an undertone that made Webb's blood run cold. It was about sending me a personal message. What kind of message? Sarah picked up her jacket and moved toward the door. The kind that means this operation just became personal, and the kind that means everyone involved is about to discover exactly what 15 years of classified training can accomplish when someone decides the rules no longer apply. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where are you watching from, and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget.